Hi, my name's Stuart Lynch, and this is another video in my iOS 16 series. This time, I'll be diving into the new ImageRenderer where we can generate images of our views. At first glance, this is pretty straightforward, but as I was building my sample project, I came across a couple of issues that you should be aware of. We'll be looking at generating images from views, and we'll be using two different examples. One will be to generate an image from a view that has a fixed frame size, and the other where the view size is determined by the amount of space made available by the device screen and the layout. We'll also look at some best practices for avoiding issues with transparency and resolution. I love getting your feedback, so tap the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video and leave a comment below. Make sure you subscribe to the video and ring that bell to get notifications of new videos. And if you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. I've created a sample project for this video, and it requires iOS 16 or later, so you must be using Xcode version 14 or higher. And at the time of this video, you can see I'm using Xcode Beta 5. The project itself is pretty basic. There is a tab view with two tabs, one for each of the examples that I will be creating. In each case, I'll be creating a view where the comment is located, and when I click on the Render Image button, it will generate an image and update the optional state property called Rendered Image with that generated image. This then will update the rendered image view here. This is simply a placeholder image here if the image has not yet been generated, so still optional. If it has been generated, then the rendered image is set to resizable, scale to fit, and within a frame where the width is set to 325. I'll talk a bit more about this supporting files when we get to it. So let's get started. In our first example, our view is going to be a business card that we want to be able to create and share with others. The business card is going to have an image and 3 text views, and we're going to allow the user to enter 3 strings. So we'll be using a text field that will be bound to 3 state properties. So let's create one for the name, one for email, and one for company. And they'll all be empty strings. Next then we can create a VStack where we'll create 3 text fields. And we can bind them to our state properties so that we can enter the card info. The first will be a text field for the name, bound to name. And then we'll follow that for one for the company, and then one for the email. Let's also set our text field style to rounded border. And then, something that I often forget, I want to make sure that our keyboard for the email field is an email address type. And I'll also want to turn off that capitalization of the first character in the text field by setting the text input auto capitalization to never. So let's get started on our card design. We'll start with an H-stack and we'll add an image using the system name of person.circle.fill. We'll make it resizable, scale to fit, and then I'm going to set a frame where the width and the height are 75. I want this to be at the left of our card, so in the right hand side of the H-stack we'll create a V-stack that will contain our text entries. But I want to make sure that it is aligned to the leading edge with a spacing of 15. And then I can add a text view for the name, and I can set the font to a size of Title 3 and make it bold so that it stands out more on my card. Then I'll follow that with text views for the company and the email without any modifications. And then to push everything in the H-stack to the left, let's add a spacer. Let's bring it away from the edges by adding some padding. And then I'll set a frame to a width of 325 and a height of 150. Now I want to have the outline of a card surrounding this content. So I can do that by setting a background to a rounded rectangle, and I can use a corner radius of 10, and then just set the stroke to a line width of 1. You can see in the preview, as I start to enter information in my text fields, our card gets filled out. What I want to do now is to be able to allow the user to choose a photo from their Photos album to replace this placeholder image. And in iOS 16, we have a new Photos UI framework for SwiftUI. I have a complete video on this, and I recommend that you watch it, as I'm not going to go over this in any detail here. However, I'm going to use the file that we created in that video, and I've already added it to the sample project here. This is an ImagePicker class that's an observable object that will allow me to pick one or more images, and if a single image, like what we're doing here, it'll update the image selection property, and that in turn will transform it and update the image view that we'll use to replace the placeholder image on our card. So back in our business card view, we'll need to import the Photos UI framework. Then to get access to our image picker, we'll create a state object and create an instance of the image picker class, and I'll just call it image picker. Let's comment out this image for now, and I want to replace it with an instance of the Photos picker. And we'll use the overload that binds the selection to our image picker's image selection property. And we'll want to match our selection to only allow us to pick images from our shared photo library. Now, the photo picker then requires something to tap on to present the picker. Well, if we already have a selected image, I want to use that image. If we haven't, we can use our placeholder. So, if an image has been selected, we can unwrap that image with an if-let, and then use it by making it resizable, scale to fit. We can set a frame to be 75 by 75, but in order to look like our placeholder image, I want to clip it in the shape of a circle. Now, if it's not yet selected, we can just use that image placeholder that we had before. So I'll just copy, paste it in here, and uncomment it. Let's test this now in the preview by filling out these text fields. Now when I tap on the image, I'm presented with the Photos picker where I can select from my Photos album. It looks like I should have used scale to fill instead of scale to fit. So let me go back and change that. Well, now down to what we're really here for. I want to render that created business card to an image so that I eventually will be able to share it with others. So in order to create an image, we need to pass the entire view to an image renderer. So let's just cut this out, the entire view, and create a computed property. And we're going to call that card view. So then we can just create a new computed property called card view that is of some view type. And then we can just paste in that entire view right here. And our preview looks just as it did before. So now it's time to add the action for our button that will actually render our image. And it's a very simple API. We first create a renderer that is an image renderer that has one argument, which is some view, and that happens to be our card view. Now, if this is successful in rendering, we can unwrap the image by getting the renderer's UI image property, and then assigning that to our rendered image view by using the image made from that UI image. Well, let's test. First, let's fill out our form fields. Now, let's choose an image. With our card now formed, let's tap on the Render Image button. I have a problem in that the right part of that image border is missing. And that's strictly because it's the resolution. We'll need to scale that rendered image for Retina displays. So we'll need to add another property to our renderer, and that's the scale property, and set it equal to 3. To save some time, let me just tap on the Render Image button now, and I see that I now get the full card. And if I had entered content, it would be in there. So what good is this if we can't share what we've just created? If we have a rendered image, we can use the new ShareLink that was introduced in iOS 16. And a ShareLink will bring up a share sheet and present content for sharing, as long as that content conforms to the transferable protocol, and our image does. So after the rendered image view, we can check to see if we actually have a rendered image. And if so, we'll present a share link where the item is our rendered image. And we can also create a preview using an instance of the share view. And we'll just use the string myCard and set the image of the preview to be the rendered image itself. Let me test this on the simulator now. Let's enter our card information. I've added another image to the simulator's photo library, so let me choose it. It may look familiar to you. I can render the image, and when I do, the share button appears. Let me tap on it, and I can choose to share to files. I can see the preview image here, so I can enter a name for the file. This saves it to our files location. So let's exit to the home screen, and let's check out our files folder. Let me open that image. It doesn't look very good. The resolution is really poor. And what I've discovered is that by saving as a UI image itself is not great. It turns out that the renderer also has a CG image property as well. So let's return to our action and change that image to that of a CG image. And this, of course, is going to require that we use a different overload for our image view. And we'll use the one that uses the decorative image, which is a CG image, and we'll assign a scale of 1. Let me test once more. This is much better and now very clear. However, there's another issue. Let me switch to dark mode. Well, it turns out that my background for my card was transparent. So my text basically vanishes into the background. So in order to fix this, I'm going to have to actually create a background for my card view. And what I'll do is I'll return then to the card view and change that background to be a rounded rectangle with a corner radius of 10. But I'm going to set the fill to the color that is the system background. And then I can add an overlay of a rounded rectangle of the same corner radius, but this rectangle will use a stroke with a line width of 1. Let's test this once more then. This looks good in either light or dark mode, and can be shared not only to the Files app like we've done here, but if we're running on a real device, through a text message or an email, as you can with any other content with a share sheet. If you're still with me, I want to show you one more very important thing that you may come across when you're doing your image rendering. Again, let me show you by way of example. I'm going to create a simple chart using the new iOS 16 chart framework. I have a 2-part video series on this, and I'll leave a link in the notes below because I'm not going to go through any explanations here as I create this chart. To create a chart, we must first import charts. Next, I want to replace this comment here with our chart view, and we'll do that by creating a chart container, and I'll use bar marks to create a bar chart. So I'll use a bar mark, and for the first one, the X value, we'll use a string of day, and the value will be another string, mon, standing for Monday. And for the Y value, we'll use a string, min, for minimum, and the value will be an int 20. Now I can just duplicate this 2 more times now, and change the values for the other 2 bars to represent Tuesday and Wednesday's minimum values. To make it a little bit more interesting, let me just change the foreground style of the second bar to be one of a color of red. I'll add some padding around this, and then I'll take care of that transparency by adding a background to the entire bar chart that will be a color of our system background. And then I'm going to add some more padding around the entire chart and this padding. Now this is the chart that I want to render, and so in order to do that, I'll need to convert it into a computed property. So I'm going to call it bar chart, and then create my bar chart computed property that is some view, and then just paste that chart content into it. For our button action then, it should be pretty much identical to the previous one where I created a renderer using the image renderer for our content, but this time it's bar chart. I want to make sure that I set the scale to 3. And then again, making sure that this time, if the image exists, we'll take the CG image of that renderer and then create the image through the decorative image using a scale of 1. When I test this in the preview though, something goes drastically wrong. I don't get what I expected at all. And the reason is that our renderer has no idea what the size of our bar chart is. We have not specified anywhere what the size or the frame is of that view. What we're going to have to do is to use a geometry reader to determine the size of that bar chart view so that we can create it with the correct proportions. Federico Sanatello has a great blog post, as all of his are, on how to read a view size in SwiftUI. And I'll leave a link in the description below so that you can see more about how he's doing this. Basically, he suggests that we add another background to the view using a clear color, so it doesn't even appear, but it does take up the entire content of the view, and then we can use a geometry reader to determine the size. The key, though, is that we need to be able to use a preference key so that we can extract that size value and use it elsewhere. So let me walk you through that process then. I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it size preference key. Inside there, I'm going to import SwiftUI, and then I'm going to create a struct called size preference key that will conform to the preference key protocol. Now this is going to require two things. First, as a default value, a static property, and we'll use a CG size and initialize it as .0. It also requires a static function called reduce, and we can let Xcode autocomplete that for me, but we don't need to have any code, so we can just leave the code block empty. Next, we create an extension to view. And it's inside here where we can create a function that we'll call readSize. And I'm going to have an onChange parameter that's an escaping closure that will provide us with the CG size parameter and return void. So whatever we get back from here in our closure, we can use then in our view. Now this readSize function returns some view. Now for this view, we'll create a background, and we'll use the geometry reader that'll provide us with a geometry proxy. And we can simply create that clear color. And once that's created, then we can set the preference key for the key size preference key with the value, which is the geometry size. And then finally, we can use the onPreferenceChange modifier for the size preference key.self and perform the onChange function. To use this then, we can return to our chart view and create a state property, and we can call it viewSize and set it to cgsize.0. Then for the bar chart, we can now apply that readSize modifier to the view, which is our chart view, and then that will give us that onChange closure, which will provide us with the size, which is the geometry of that view, and it will be the new value once it's been changed, and we can assign that to our viewSize property. And since the viewSize property is outside of our view, when we create our renderer, we have access to it, and we can use that information to set the frame of our bar chart to the viewSize's width and viewSize's height before we pass it through to our renderer. If we test this out now in the preview, it looks great. One more test though, we need to test it on the simulator and see if we can save it to our file storage. So let's first go back and copy that ShareLink from our previous example because it's going to be the same. And we can paste it in. And let's run this now on the simulator to test. The image renders fine, so let's try to share it. I can see the preview, so that's looking good so far. We'll just call it bar chart, and I'll save it. So now let me look at it. It's perfect, even in dark mode. Well, that's it for this tutorial. If you liked what you saw, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel. Ring the bell there to enable notifications for future videos. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.